welcome everyone for today's session, which is on Squeaky clean code. So about the best code to learn about the best coding practices. So we have Kristi with us, who is going to let us know what those best practices are and would help us in becoming better versions of developers. So Kristi is the principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. She's also AWS community builder in serverless and lives in Boulder. So yeah, over to you, Kristi.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and take the screen share. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my title slide here. I will try to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A as we go along. But yes, thank you for the introduction. So my name is Kristi. I'm a principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. And today we're going to talk a bit about Squeaky clean code and how to adopt some better coding practices. So a quick agenda first. I'm going to give an introduction on myself a bit more, and I'll talk a bit about the company that I work for, Liberty Mutual. Since these are the Women Who Code groups, I will also talk a little bit about some of our Women in Tech initiatives and some of the work that I do over there as well, especially with this being Women's History Month. I will actually define what clean code is, and then we'll talk about some of the best standards for clean code and how to set up your environment. We'll get into every developer's favorite topic, which is documentation, I'm sure. We're going to talk about code reviews and how you can learn from them. And finally, I'll wrap up with some success stories that I've experienced from following some of these best practices. So first, a little bit about Liberty Mutual, if you haven't heard of us. So we are an insurance company that exists to help people embrace today and confidently pursue tomorrow. We do this by promising protection for the unexpected delivered with care. Some quick facts for you. We're nearly 45,000 employees globally, and actually roughly 5,000 of those sit in technology roles, which does surprise people sometimes, but yep, most of our tech is pretty in-house. We're the 6th largest global property and casualty insurer, and we're also ranked on the Fortune 100 list. In 2021, and actually I believe for this year as well, we've been voted one of the best places to work in IT. And along with that, we do have a huge focus on diversity and inclusion. Forbes has listed us as one of the best employers for diversity, for new grads, and for women. And we've also received a perfect score of 100 in the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, actually in 2018, 19, 20, and 21. And additionally, we've been voted one of the best places to work for LGBTQ equality too. So specifically a little bit about some of the women in tech work we do. I'm very involved in this space, and we have a pretty large organization and a global footprint with this as well. So the first group that's pretty near and dear to my heart is one that we call LEGIT, and it stands for Liberty Encouraging Girls in Technology. And we've been around for about 7 years now with our mission to really help teach girls coding and promote those STEM disciplines in the K through 12 sector, and a little bit with the college students. So in 2020, we had over 350 Liberty volunteers teaching to over 12,000 students. We've also continued to do events and done kind of virtual storytelling and kind of take home kits and stuff with students throughout the pandemic. So we've gotten a little creative. Specifically, I also work with I lead our external branding and communications. So just talking about LEGIT at events like this and promoting it externally is kind of one of my passions. So some super exciting stuff we have. If you're interested or you're a mom with kids at home and want to get involved in this, I'm definitely happy to chat with you about that. Additionally, we run a Women in Tech Summit mentorship program for college freshmen and sophomore women to apply to. In the past, they've come to our office for about a week And we get to actually work one-on-one with mentoring with them throughout their fall semesters, and really keeping them engaged in technology and building that support system that they may not have at their universities for women in technology. So definitely not a pitch to work here, but if anything's interesting to you, definitely feel free to check us out, or reach out to me after this. I'm also pretty involved with interviewing, especially with our new grads and new hires. So feel free to reach out if you want to learn more. So a little bit about myself. I am a principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual. I've been there for about 5 years now. Specifically, the last 2 years, I work on our serverless DevOps and enablement team, where we work to help kind of embrace the serverless first initiative for all 5,000 of our tech employees. I'm also recently named a AWS community builder. I'm part of the serverless cohort. So I do a lot of tech blogging and speaking at events such as this one about cool things like serverless and cloud, and Python is my favorite language as well. So definitely very partial to that too, as I'm sure you'll notice. I also have a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering, which I received from Boston University last January, which I worked on while working full time. So I do actually did a lot in like the IoT machine learning space with my degree there. So I'll say that robotics is kind of my guilty pleasure interest, not my day-to-day. And finally, I live out in Boulder, Colorado. I'm originally from the East Coast, from the Boston, New Hampshire area. But I love being out here to hike and ski and mountain bike. And I'm also pretty involved with the Women Who Code Denver Boulder cohort. So if you haven't checked us out yet, definitely feel free to join. We try to run a monthly tech meetup, as well as I've been trying to engage a little bit more with the social media there. So now that that's all the way, we'll talk about some clean code. So I want to start with this definition that I really like. Clean code is defined as code that's easy to understand, easy to change, and follows good standards. Now, this was defined by Robert C. Martin in his Clean Code Handbook. I will admit, I've gotten this question a couple of times. I have not read this book cover to cover. However, if you just even do like a quick Google search on what clean code is, he's all over it. This is where a lot of those standards come from, and a lot of people that are blogging about this or sharing things about this or creating these standards and guidelines reference this book. So it's on my list to check out. Should be on yours too as well. So these are, that's kind of easy, well said and done. But what does that actually mean? Like, how does that translate to our technical code? So I kind of like this idea of splitting up, what clean code is, but I also want to highlight importantly what clean code is not. So first of all, I view clean code as being able to answer these big three questions. So what, how, and why. So in some cases, what is your code doing? Your code should be able to innately answer that for you. How is your code working? You should be able to look at your code base or your repo or your project and be able to answer that question. And then the why can kind of dive into some of these other things like, why are you using this class here? Why is this method here? Why are you using this variable? So these are kind of important questions that as somebody who's reviewing your code, even if it's you, should be able to innately answer from it. Clean code is refactorable, as most of us know in the tech space. Tech is always changing, always evolving. There are new things coming out pretty much every day, it seems like. So your code should be able to keep up with that pretty easily. You should be able to, upgrade minor or major versions of things or add new features or do things to it pretty easily. Kind of going hand in hand with that is clean code's maintainable. As you build out code and products. I know in our case, especially at a large enterprise that's been around for 100 years, we have a lot of applications that hang out for several of those years that we still support and have to maintain going forward. So is it built in a way where you can handle bug fixes, you can add new features and enhancements, or you can break it out and be a little bit more modular with it as things grow over time? Clean code being formatted and readable, I think, is probably the easiest one to kind of understand and to work with, and the one that everyone thinks of when we think of clean code. I will be the first to say I do not care if you're using tabs or spaces, just pick one and be consistent with it throughout. Clean code's definitely something that you can look at and say like, hey, this is neat, it's organized, it follows an easy way to read and way to look at. Finally, it's easy to test. And I mean this in kind of every sense of the way. Maybe you do unit tests, maybe you're doing more integration testing, maybe you're doing more manual testing, but it should be really good to, it should be fairly easy for you to write these unit tests or to work through them. Or if it isn't, it's at least documented very well in your code, which I will definitely get into later on. So the things I want to call out that clean code is not, it's not just commenting everything. Just because you throw a comment in there, it doesn't really help with making it formatted and readable. It doesn't help with these actionable items like refactoring and staying on top of it and maintaining your code or making it easy to test. In some cases, comments are definitely necessary and really useful and valuable, but just going through and commenting old pieces of code to explain how it works is not what means making it clean. It's also just not making your code look nice. So I mentioned, the tab spaces, like just because you do that doesn't mean your code's clean now. It might be easier to read, it might be easier to format, but it's not all of these other things that I just went through explaining. And finally, I don't want you to take away like that I'm telling you the right way to code everything and that there's one right way to do all of this. Some of this is definitely really open to interpretation. And I'd really encourage you to just kind of take what resonates with you, even if it's just a couple points here and there to bring back to your projects or bring back to your teammates. This definitely doesn't have to be like a roadmap of exactly how you need to do something. But I will share some of the best practices that my team has followed and that I've been working with for the last couple of years that I think has been working out really well. So the first thing I want to talk about is a team coding standards document. So for those of you that have been working in an agile environment, this is not a team working agreement. So a team working agreement kind of determines like your ceremonies and how you work with your peers or your product teams. This is very specific to your developer team. So this is where you sit down with your other developers and you agree on and set your standards for your code. This is a living document. It's something that you're going to want to revisit pretty often. For us, that tends to be if a team member leaves, we get a new team member, we adopt a new project, or we take on a legacy project. This is something that we go back and revisit probably once a quarter or when those changes occur so that we can make sure we're staying up to date with certain things. As I mentioned, text changing all the time. So we want to make sure that this document and our code standards are staying up to date with that. So I'll show you kind of a sample team coding standards that my team follows and has documented in our processes. So some of the things that I think are really valuable to include in this would be like a recommended tool set. So list out the programming languages you prefer to use. I understand that sometimes in enterprise, you don't always have a choice. But if you do, like definitely settle on that here, as well as like the best plugins and IDEs. So for us, we really like Visual Studio Code. We do preference Python in a lot of our projects. So we call out that we use that. We'll use PyCharm sometimes as well. So we just document this here. And that helps us as well as helping like new people on board as well to kind of get a feel for some of the technology preferences and the skills that are on the team. We also include our branching strategy. So this could be different. Again, I don't really care exactly how your team wants to work with it. If you don't like feature branches, you don't have to use them. If you, for some reason, have maybe 2 core branches that you're working out of mains, that's totally fine too. We prefer the feature develop to main. Sometimes we just do a develop to main branching strategy, but we call that out here. And then we also, if it's kind of different for some of our other projects, we'll highlight which projects or repos we might not be following this strategy for. The testing strategy is also really important. So this is where we call out, how we're handling unit tests, how we're doing manual testing, and also in some cases, if we have a lot of projects that are kind of overlapping or doing kind of similar things, we'll call out some common test cases that we'll want to use. So this could be, if you're in Java, like maybe you want to call out that, hey, we're preferencing JUnit, we want to use this version. Maybe you'll kind of show the structure of a basic test outline that you like to follow or use, how you like to mock things. Maybe we'll even save a couple mock test events or things that we know we'll use pretty frequently. So that's kind of what you want to include in your testing strategy. We also include language specific guides. So this kind of goes hand in hand with that recommended tool set piece. So if you have a Python project, you want to call out what version you're using. 3.8, 3.8.1, 3.8.12. I know we're on like 3.9.7 now, I think. Hopefully you're not still on 3.6. And then we call out what kind of styling we want to follow. So we've used like the Google style guide in the past. We call out certain linters or plugins that we like to use. Again, this is where the tabs and spaces comes into play too. You can call that out here. And we also call out how we want our doc strings, our method level comments to look like in our code. So we'll call out, a short description and then your arguments and returns sometimes. Sometimes we don't always follow that, but good place to document that. We also include a code review policy and our README outlines in this document. However, I've starred those because we're going to go into those a little bit more in depth in the coming slides. Before we get into that, though, I do want to talk about your environment setup. This is arguably the hardest part about being a developer, is setting up your environment. I always dread getting a new laptop because it means I have to remember all of the cool tools and tech and set everything up again. So one thing that helps with this is I would highly recommend doing this as a team, especially if you're forming as a new team or you're joining a team as a new person or have somebody you're onboarding. It just makes it really cohesive to kind of help everybody out, like get started. What we've done in the past, being completely remote distributed team, is just hop on a call for an hour or two and somebody shares their screen and everybody's doing the same thing kind of along with them. So we can ask questions and run things together. So you don't run into that issue of, well, it works on my machine all the time. You don't have to, but I would recommend sticking to the same tools. If you have someone on your team or you yourself are pretty set in what you like to use, you don't have to change your mind for it. I just find that it's easier, especially working with more junior developers, to kind of walk through issues, and it helps when everybody's in the same environment using the same tools, and you can kind of work together and collaborate a little bit more easily on those things. One of the cool features that I really like that Visual Studio Code does is a live code sharing feature. I tried it a couple times. It's just like a plugin that you can use for Visual Studio Code. I'm not sure if other IDEs use this yet or not, but it's basically like making your IDE environment like a Google Doc so that everybody can contribute and work together on it. And this is really awesome for like pair programming or mobbing on stories and things. So we've used this a couple times and I'd highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. And finally, as you're going through your environment setup, you can have that code standards doc up so that you can keep track of what you want to use, and then maybe what you're setting up kind of goes vice versa into that document. So that's why I say it's kind of a living document, because you might go through this setup and be like, hey, we said we wanted to use this plugin. I actually don't think it's that great. Like, maybe we don't put that in here for now. Or you're setting stuff up and you find something that's really cool that you do want to use, and you can go back in and say, hey, actually, we're going to do this version of this thing, or we're going to add this plugin instead. So you kind of like keep those two things really in line as you're going through your setup. All right, so I know everybody's been anxiously awaiting talking about documentation, and you must be so excited. I'll try to keep this pretty succinct, but I want to talk about this kind of from the ground up. So we're going to start really small and then kind of work our way out of scope in terms of documentation. So the smallest piece of documentation is that comments piece. Again, we don't want to comment everything. And the kind of adage is, intuitive code really should not need a ton of comments to tell you what it's doing. We try to use comments for like method level blocks. So if there's a lot of logic going on, if you need to clarify a lot of things, like this is where those comment blocks make a lot of sense. If you have smaller like helper definitions and things, it's pretty like, hey, convert to, Fahrenheit to Celsius or something, like that's pretty descriptive of what it's doing. It's probably not a huge method. You probably don't need to comment something like that. However, if you're building out like an API and you have all these endpoints and things, and it's calling out to a whole bunch of different services, like that might be really useful for this method level comment block where you can really keep track of your arguments and your returns and things. So there's definitely a time and place for this. Use your discretion as best as you can through these things, and just make sure like, you're doing things that kind of make sense, like name variables appropriately for what they're doing. And honestly, that's one of the harder parts of coding as well, I think, is naming things and making sure that they stay up to date. The next level of documentation, so I'm a firm believer that your documentation should be very close to your code. I will say you always should include a README at the root level of your project. Even if it's a super small project, even if there's not a ton going on, I think it's just hugely helpful. I have used it so many times just because I'm trying to keep track of a dozen different projects and repos, and sometimes other team members will touch things before I do. And like, it's been a month or two since I've been in a project and I forget how to run my code or run my tests or what we're doing in it sometimes. So even if you don't have a ton of people contributing to it or visiting it all that often, I'd say it's huge just for yourself to have these. I would highly recommend following a standardized template, which I will also go into on the next slide a bit, kind of similar to the team coding standards. I found this really easy to get documentation up and running in your different projects because it's pretty much just a copy paste and then you fill out relevant information. So you don't have to spend a ton of time working on documentation after you've outlined this template. Also optional, but you can definitely include links to other external resources. What we like to do is talk about how to run or test your project and then link out to the downloads or some of the installs and things that you may need to run and use this project. So we'll throw links throughout our README projects as needed. So a README template, this is kind of one that our team really likes to follow. So we'll call out the project name at the very top, and we like to include badges. If you don't know what those are, they're just kind of like little icons that show you like the status of your different branches and your build and deploy pipelines. And actually, I think some of them even do like how many open pull requests are on your project and some of those things. So those are really helpful to really highlight and get a quick snapshot of the state of the project and maybe how often it's being used. We'll go into an overview. There's just a high level description of what this project is doing, maybe the resources that exist in it. Most of my projects are serverless and we work with the cloud. So we'll call out a lot of our key resources here. So like for AWS, we have a lot of projects that might have a Dynamo table, an S3 bucket, a bunch of Lambda functions. So we'll call those out kind of at the top so that you know exactly what resources are being provisioned and managed in this project. Your description could be anything from a sentence to a couple paragraphs if you feel like it warrants that much code, that much extra documentation, especially if you have folks that are contributing to this all the time that aren't just you. So in an open source project or maybe your enterprise, kind of inner source project would be where you'd want to describe more. Building and running, this one's kind of obvious, but we like to call out exactly what's required and exactly what you need to build and run your project. So for us, that would be like, hey, make sure you have Python and you have to be on at least this version for this to work. We like to use like talks for a lot of our tests. So we'll call that out in here and say like, hey, download it. And this is how you run it. This is how you set it up. So we outline exactly all of those build, deploy, run steps, like right there in your code so that everybody has it. And yeah, with testing as well, we do the same thing. So running your unit tests and how to test manually will also include in here. And that goes kind of hand in hand with that endpoint documentation. So like if you have an API, we'll actually like even sometimes put screenshots of exactly what your Postman requests would look like to test with this so that you don't have to like keep saving everything and when it's right there. And we'll show some valid endpoints or your testing endpoints and exactly what you should be sending as the request and return what you should be expecting in a response as well. So this makes testing and those things really easy. And it saved me, I don't know how many times when I have not been in the project forever and I don't remember how to do something. This is a really easy and nice refresher that's just right there for you. And finally, we list out our team members as the contributors, main contributors of or maintainers even of the project. This is really helpful for if you have multiple people in here contributing or doing pull requests to your code because they know exactly who to reach out to for help and who's maintaining these things. So last documentation slide I have, external docs are pretty important as well. Not always necessary depending on what you're doing. Like I said, definitely feel free to link out to those versions, those programming languages, the tools that you're using. If you're finding that this is like a project that's part of like a larger thing or really interconnected with a bunch of other teams or something, you might have like some external resources like a wiki page or a Git book or something else that you're managing like internally that you'll want to link out to. That's totally fine. I'd highly encourage you to do this in here. We're talking a lot right now about well-architected reviews. This is something that kind of comes from AWS a little bit in terms of how to, honestly, a lot of it is how to code clean in some cases and just how to build well-architected projects. So we'll link out to that sometimes if your project's gone through a review of those. Threat models and context diagrams are also big here. If you have like a lucid chart diagram you want to show, or something on a mural board or whatever, you can definitely link that or even screenshot it or import it into your project here too. The only thing I would say is with all of these things, make sure they are being linked in your README and connected to your code in some way. There's nothing worse than coming to somebody's page and seeing like absolutely no documentation, or hey, reach out to such and such about this. Like it's really helpful to have all your documentation in one place, so you're not sending your developers or your contributors kind of all over the place hunting for it. So code reviews, we're going to jump into how to use these as a learning tool. And when I say that, I don't just mean as a junior or beginner developer. I think that everyone at every level in their career can use code reviews as a great place to learn and to grow. So one of the things that we like is to ask a ton of questions and have discussions. So actually in our kind of agile standards document, we call out like nobody takes offense to anything, or don't take things personally that we're writing in here. And we just have very open and honest kind of dialogues and discussions around our code reviews. One thing I love to say is no comment is ever too small or too silly. And this might have, some people might kind of have a differing opinion on this. My view of this is, when I started 4 or 5 years ago in enterprise and started doing code reviews and pull requests, I didn't know what to comment on. Like I didn't know what I didn't know yet, right? Like I came here to learn. I don't know how to contribute to these things because like I'm just learning them and I'm not an expert and I don't know how to do stuff. So I just started being kind of nitpicky, and I would pick out, if they had like extra lines somewhere, or the formatting was off, or if they needed a comment somewhere because I was totally lost reading the code. Like I just picked on little things, and that eventually grew into like, okay, now I really understand this code base and what's going on here. And I feel comfortable and confident contributing to the code and contributing to these code reviews and pull requests. So I highly recommend, maybe you don't have to overdo it like completely, but it does really help, especially if you're newer to this process, to kind of just get your feet wet a little bit and get used to commenting on things. And usually, my senior devs and tech leads have been really helpful and have listened to a lot of this feedback, and they're like, okay, yeah, you're right. We should have pretty clean grammar and code in here. So, we'll work on the formatting and this and that. So they will pick it up and change it. And then you're also making your code cleaner and more readable and formatted. On the more senior side, this is a great way. So if you're the one that opened the pull request, it's a great way to explain exactly why or how you did something. So you can add it in your description, but also like if I open a pull request, sometimes I'll go back through it and be like, hey, I did it this way because I couldn't figure out how to do it, XYZ way, or hey, I noticed that there was this new cool library that I wanted to use, so I brought it in, and that's why I did this here. So it's a way for you to kind of walk through your process and get used to talking about code and how you do things. And it helps out your more junior developers, and it shows some transparency into your own learning journey as well, which I do think helps other people kind of be more vulnerable and ask those questions and start some of that discussion. And finally, yeah, definitely don't take things personally. We try our best to not use like the needs work button on our pull requests, because sometimes it does have a bit of a negative connotation. But even so, like if something's getting a little bit, we want to debate it a little bit more, or if there's a lot of comments or questions on something, we'll take it out of the pull request and actually hop on a call and talk about things. So you kind of balance some of that as well. And we like to have a ton of fun in our pull requests too. But these are some kind of this is actual screenshots I've taken from previous pull requests that we've done. You know, it doesn't always have to be something constructive. It can just even be like a compliment, like, hey, you know, nice use of this try with resources here. You know, I've even forgotten about it. Cool that you found a way to use it here. Like, yeah, and these are like questions I've asked, you know, hey, I'm not a TypeScript person. I have no idea what you're using this question mark for. And then just kind of like FYIs or heads up for the pull request or for the code review or for something else you have coming down the line. That first one is totally real, by the way, too. We did have a pull request that had over 100 comments and notes in it. To be fair, a unit test refactor, yeah, it had a lot of, there was a lot of debate in it and a lot of questions. Two of us were newer on the team and we had a tech lead that we were kind of going back and forth with. But we had a lot of fun with it. And honestly, if you'll notice, it's from 2019. So I actually remember this exact pull request and was able to go back and reference it. So it does make an impact. But finally, you know, have some fun with it. We like to do some fun things like include memes where we want to include memes and kind of like loosen it up a bit and just have some fun. We also have, you know, this little story here where my friend went through and did a third person chat about using Java 8, which was kind of funny. And then anybody who knows me knows that I can be a little sassy sometimes. So I like to pick on some of our test accounts and things that people put in there. So definitely don't have to do this if it's not the dynamic on your team. I've been lucky enough to work with some really awesome people that are pretty open and fun. So we try to keep it light. So I kind of want to talk a little bit just about, you know, this stuff does really work in practice. I've been following this for a couple of years now, and I really haven't run into too many issues with things. And I think it's led to some really awesome clean code. The first is a couple of years ago, we worked on a database application that we built out and ended up passing it off to another team to maintain and build features on going forward. And we actually had one meeting with them and transferred everything over. And I think they have reached out to us maybe once or twice since then. But our documentation was so thorough and so good that they knew exactly where to start. They knew what they needed. They knew how to download things. They knew where to find what they needed in the code, how to work through stories and how to create tests for something that they've just created. And this was also a team of people who were not traditional developers. So they were all former network admins and database administrators. So they really didn't have a coding background either. So this is pretty unheard of if you've ever had the pain of taking on somebody else's project or passing one off to somebody else. So I really attribute a lot of that success to our documentation and our clean code practices. And this is still a very active, popular project that folks are using and interacting with every day at our company as well. The second is with open source collaboration. So we do have some projects that folks are able to contribute to. And we've had nothing but like positive feedback from that experience as well. We have a lot of folks that do not hesitate to contribute a pull request or to go through a review with us just because the process is documented so well and they feel so comfortable going through it. So we've gotten nothing but positive feedback in terms of just collaborating with our team and from an external point of view. And finally, we actually took these things into an internal hackathon that we have at our company. And our team won the Clean Code Rookie Award for how clean our code was, the Tech Excellence Award for how clean our code was. And we followed these within a 24-hour overnight hackathon. So, you know, if your excuse is you don't have time to do these things, I like to joke that like you definitely do, because if we could do this and build out a working application within 24 hours and still have a couple of tests and documentation and things like that in here, then you can definitely do this on your teams and in your projects. So I got a little bit of bonus content for those of you that are still with me. I've been talking for a little while now. So I kind of want to talk about, you know, there's this argument of like, I don't have time to do this, you know, we'll never prioritize it on my team. Like, how do I get this kind of as a priority, as something to work on? And the three things that I have to say to that have to roll up to time, cost, and security. And these are really the three things that your business, or maybe you as an individual creating projects, really cares about, right? I will say that these things do take a little bit of time up front. You might have to set aside a week or a sprint to go through and do team coding standards and get a README doc in order, all of those kinds of things. But the payoff is definitely substantial. So cost and security are pretty hand in hand, I think. And when we're doing these clean coding practices, it's going to help you a lot to stay on top of your tech debt more. And in that case, you know, it's going to save you money and it's going to save you on security, because a lot of versions and updates and things you'll be more on top of. So those things that are patches, are vulnerabilities, you know, you're handling right away. And also, you know, if your code is maintainable and refactorable, that means you can take advantage of all these new technologies and things that hopefully will make your code and, you know, running these things kind of cheaper. You know, you might find down the line that you don't need certain resources because new things have been developed that you can plug in and use, or you're constantly learning and you want to be able to hook something else up that you think is going to work better. And that's going to save on cost, security, and time in the future. So these are kind of like the three big arguments that I like to use when you have to go back to your product team or your management. It does take some time up front, but I think that the payoff is substantial. So just a quick closing to kind of wrap this up. You know, best practices I can surmise and create and follow your team standards and walk through a setup together. That's going to help you a lot. I think if you do anything, start with this first, see how it goes. You keep it as a living document, continue to add to it. I think that would definitely bring you in the step in the right direction in terms of having clean code. Document everything. If you haven't documented anything up to this point, like, don't panic. Like, start maybe now with new projects and things, and then, you know, slowly add those extra things in the background as you're going in to kind of retroactively go back and add documentation as well. It's the most boring thing. I totally get it, but it's going to save you a lot in the long run. And definitely use your code reviews to learn. Don't take things offensively if you're the one that opened the pull request and there's some feedback on it. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there and ask a ton of questions, start discussions, or nitpick little things if you're just starting out. That never hurts either. And then finally, hopefully a lot of you are in tech because you really enjoy it. So get out there and kind of enjoy your programming, enjoy your journey, enjoy the learning. We're all learning as we're going through this. And yeah, hopefully we can do it clean going forward. So that's pretty much all I had for you today. I included my Twitter and my LinkedIn here for those. I'm pretty active on both of those in the tech spaces if you want to reach out. Also just newly added myself to the Python Slack group this morning because I did not realize I was in it, but I am in both that one and the cloud one as well if you want to reach out. The first burning question I'll answer is, I mentioned that I love hiking. This was taken at Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park in Colorado. Pretty awesome, really impressive if you want to check it out. And just finally, I like to speak a ton if you haven't gathered that by now. So I have some upcoming speaking engagements. I know at the very beginning, we mentioned that I'll be coming back to speak with the Women Who Code group on April 22nd about serverless. I'm also going to be at the AWS Summit in San Francisco, DevOps Days Denver, and I am a featured speaker for serverless in the park. So for the cloud folks out there, the serverless folks out there, if you're at any of these or want to check it out, please feel free. And finally, I am a CDK Day conference coordinator. Unfortunately, CDK Day also falls on the Women Who Code conference day. However, CDK Day is virtual and free, so you can still sign up and kind of juggle both conferences if you want and pick out different talks to go to. Additionally, we do have a call for proposals that's open until April 20th. I would love to see some women speaking at that as well. So if you're in the CDK space, you really love it and enjoy it, you want to talk about it, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you with a topic. We're definitely actively looking in that space as well. So with that, I will stop talking and hopefully answer some questions here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristi. It was a wonderful session. I thoroughly enjoyed it and actually learned a lot of things, which I'll definitely apply for my next project. So we have a couple of questions. So the first question is that how do you negotiate on scopes of features when time is not enough for the given sprint?
Sure. Yeah. So I imagine that was kind of to the prioritization piece of it. It's definitely not easy, right? Especially, my organization is very large. It's been around for 100 years, and sometimes changing mindsets are really difficult, and finding that time to do those things are really tough. I found that, if you take time to put a story in your backlog and really add detailed description as to why you need to do these things, and again, the cost, the security, and the time are huge things to kind of bring up that are important. That really helps in that argument. And also, in Agile, we're really trying to get that whole slice of the cake. And that includes the code, the testing, and you want to bake in those things like the documentation and being kind of future proof for things as well. So eventually you kind of get to that point where you're like, hey, we are baking some of these things into our stories already. So it's less to go back to and look for and help. But I have noticed, putting things in your backlog as soon as you notice them, and making sure you talk about them in your refinement meetings and bringing up those important points do help with the scope. But yeah, time is always an issue, definitely in teams.
Awesome. I think your bonus tip was really useful. So, okay, so another question which we have is from Anjali, which is asking that which applications to use for documentation. Any suggestions?
Sure. So if you're talking about like where you want your documentation to live, I would definitely say, we use GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever your code repository system is. Just include a markdown README file is a great first step to anything. As far as other kind of documentation sources, I mentioned, we use wiki pages at our company. I've also used Gitbook before, which is like a code repository that just creates like a documentation book or site of sorts. And there's a couple other software things out there that do that. Yeah, you can use GitHub Wiki too. I just saw that comment in there as well. It's really, I don't have a preference. It's really based on where you think it's going to get the most visibility and what your team wants to use. Markdown's pretty great. That's the way you can get some of the badges and stuff in there. So I'd highly recommend doing that, and just as close to your code as possible. Definitely helps. I know some of us are forced into certain tooling or options with our companies. I really just prefer to use the README docs and link out to other resources.
Awesome. So I really can relate with this, because as a student, when we start our engineering journeys, we are tend to like focus on developing code and stuff and just writing code, and not like, we are more like independent developers at the starting stage. But once we get on our projects, and when then we have to co-develop and become like develop in a team, that's where all these coding best practices play a major role, where we have to like share our code, get code reviews and stuff. So I think as soon as we start using these best practices, which is Kristi described in great detail and really nicely, so the better it is. Like the sooner we start in our engineering tech journey, I think better it is. So we have another we have another comment, that can you recommend any tool which reads comments in code and create documentation or something similar?
Ooh, I don't know if I have used anything specifically that does that to generate documentation. I think it does exist though. I will say one of the things that we like to do that kind of is a time saver, in the IntelliJ IDE, at least, I know you can go into your settings and actually like structure exactly how you would want that method level comment block to look. So every time you like can auto type like what, you start writing your comment, it'll actually like auto populate with the exact structure. So like you can put in your overview, you can put in your arguments and your returns. So that definitely is a bit of a time saver and helps you out. And that's again where the importance of like, do your setup together and set up your team coding standards, because you have those in two places now that you can use and you've done all together. So it's consistent across the board. So when you do get into those code reviews, you have the same, everybody has the same look and feel and the same standards in there already. As far as a tool that does actually scan your code, I can't think of anything off the top of my. If you find something, definitely let me know. It sounds pretty cool. I'd like to take advantage of it.
Awesome. So if anybody has another doubt, do let us know in the chat or in the Q&A section. We can wait for like a couple of minutes, for the attendees if they have any doubts. Someone has I think for VS Code, someone has dropped some link for
cool.
maybe, for this comments read thing.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I love Visual Studio, so I do a lot of my Python programming in there. And if anybody thinks of anything after the fact too, definitely feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm pretty active in the space, is always happy to chat and answer questions.
Also, for just an FYI, for all those who are interested in learning how to code Python in less number of lines, in a more cleaner way, you can check out our series. We have recently created a series on less is more, how to code Python in one line. So you can definitely check them out. All the sessions are there on YouTube. So yeah, that would also help you specifically for Python. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So thank you so much again, Kristi, for a wonderful session. We thoroughly enjoyed, and all of the content, like each and everything was so great, and it was so helpful for the developers at every age. So I think that's wonderful. Now, thank you so much,
thank you so
everyone.
much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Do check other events. We have events all around the year, so all the links are mentioned in the chat. Do join our Slack channel to get up to be updated about all the different events happening across tracks as well. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.